So what if I could tell you, basically I could hand you a single number that would tell you how smart you are, right? And you've kind of felt this pull before. Imagine you're sitting at the dinner table and, I don't know, somebody asked a question and then somebody got it faster. Or maybe you got it the fastest. And you kind of file them, right? You kind of file yourself. You're like, oh, that person's pretty smart. Maybe they're a little smarter than me, or maybe I'm smarter than them. And maybe you felt a little bit ashamed, or maybe you kind of felt proud, right? But that's why, any kind of number that makes the filing official like that, it's so hard to look away from, right? If I give you a number for how smart you are, or that person is, or that group is, or whatever, it's like you can't help but look away from it because it's so specific, it's so precise, and now you know, right? Now you got the answer to how smart you are, how smart that other person is. Well, this kind of stopped being just a parlor game because there's a startup called Nucleus Genomics, and they've raised about $32 million at this point, and they are now currently scoring IVF embryos for predicted IQ and ranking them so parents can basically choose, right? So it's about $2,500 and $2,500 an embryo on top of the IVF, and it launched in June 2025, and by this year, it's already reached like 160 clinics, and that's across India and the Middle East. So you think about that, right? So you take a large cohort of people, and you give them, or maybe they already have an IQ-type test score, then you sequence everybody's DNA, and then you scan for spots in the genome where a particular variant tends to show up more often in the higher scores than the lower scores, right? So you have a way of kind of filtering. And the thing they correlated the DNA against was the test score. So not intelligence, which we'll get into, but the score. Keep that in mind, right? We don't want to conflate the test score with intelligence. And I'm actually going to talk about in this episode how that is very much a conflation, that there's a lot of pseudoscience behind IQ. It's not right to just call it the same thing as intelligence for scientific reasons. You might have ethical and moral concerns about what this company's doing, but that's not what I'm talking about in this episode. I specifically want to talk about the science or lack thereof when it comes to IQ, and because of that, if you start funding these startups and actually doing it for real, this type of filtering of society, there's some real problems there. Just in terms of truth, just in terms of science, not even talking about the morals and ethics. So there's kind of two camps that basically have stared at the same type of evidence for over a century now, the IQ stuff. One calls it the most solid result in all of psychology, and then the other calls it basically swindle in a lab coat, basically snake oil, especially if you start getting startups that are doing this kind of thing. It's the same data, right? They're both certain, but they're never converging. And that non-convergence is the actual clue. And we looked at something similar in a previous episode where, it's not that you have just two camps and this is what science is and people don't always agree, right? The wave or the particle, we see this in physics, saw this in physics. It's, they didn't converge for a long time. We're going to look at, it's not the same thing as that. It's not just scientists disagreeing. There's a deeper structural flaw. There's something malformed in the question itself. There's something wrong. And as we're going to see, actually not quite scientific in the actual setup itself. Okay, now bear with me because a lot of people get hyped about this or they're going to get triggered by this. Some people really believe in IQ, and I know what you're thinking. If you're one of those, you're a proponent of the IQ, you're thinking, yeah, but it's super predictive and this and that. Okay, we'll get into all that. But first, why does that number keep winning? Like why, go back to that kind of dinner table, right? It's Thanksgiving, somebody popped a question, somebody got it quick. And I say, well, what if I could give you a number? Why is that so attractive, right? It's clean. It's got real math behind it. That's why it keeps winning, not winning scientifically, but winning to grab people's attention, right? It generally predicts a few things, and it answers the question that maybe has haunted you since grade school, right? Like, am I a smart person? I want that number. I want that ranking. Where do I sit? Right? It's in reality, it's a messy and maybe unanswerable question, but now it's settled on this one digit. You get a number. But that's not evidence, that's seduction. And what I want to convince you, hopefully in this episode, is that it is much more seduction than true science. I can explain why that is. This episode is really about what's underneath that seduction. Okay? It's one quiet move that we tend to make, that we do make with this number, and that keeps turning up, just wearing different costumes. Okay, so even though somebody keeps saying, well, wait, it predicts this, or wait, we'll get into the G factor stuff. Wait, look at this correlation. Look. There's something underneath all that, which is kind of snake oily and just really not up to the standards of what science is supposed to be. So then when you get startups that are basing their idea, their product, their service off of that, which is not quite right, actually really not right. And not only that, but bringing that into clinics and actually filtering today society based on this number, something wrong with that, right? Okay, so first, what is the thing that makes people believe in IQ? Right? Because there's scientists that believe in it. There's a huge area of psychology. A lot of psychology bases its foundation or kind of points to IQ as one of the most repeatable, rigorous results. Well, the thing that makes people believe, first of all, what is an IQ test? An IQ test, right? You get given this test. Imagine it's got like 12 sections, right? It's kind of like a dozen little tests within the main tests, right? So it might be something's on words, something's on shapes, something's on numbers. Another section is on memory, whatever. And you score 1,000 people, and then you line the results up in columns. So I wrote the test. Here's my 12 results across those 12 sections of the IQ test. You took the test. Right, I'm going to stack that beside my 12 results, and you keep stacking them again and again and again. Let's say for 1,000 people. And then you slide down the rows and the columns. You kind of move. The columns end up moving in step, meaning that where the vocab score is high, the shape scores also tend to run high, right? For the same rows, where one runs low, the other one runs low as well. So you get this correlation here, right? And it holds for all pairs of columns. It doesn't matter. Right? It always runs the same way. It never goes in reverse. It's never like kind of anti-correlated or something. So the people who are all doing well on this section, they do well in all the sections. The people that do bad on the sections, right? And nobody's really found a section that breaks that pattern. So if you look at that, I mean, even as a scientist, you look at that, and the fact that it all kind of moves in lockstep, the thing that kind of whispers to you is there must be something underneath that. There must be one thing driving all of that, right? Because this is not random, right? Why would people you administer this test to, all as individuals, some of them all do well across all those sections, some do poorly across all those sections, okay? All those sections must be, the performance across all those sections must be pointing to something. And I think the something, it's very tempting to think that something is what we call intelligence, right? Because, and you can say, well, yeah, well, what is intelligence? Well, if you hear somebody speak and then the words they use, the way that they talk, the definitions or the arguments they make, or maybe it's more like their pedigree or their degrees or whatever, we kind of have a sense that, yeah, that's a smart person, or maybe the decisions they make in life or don't make. And then you might meet someone else and be like, they're kind of average, or maybe someone seems below average. I mean, if you get into actual mental handicap, right, we have a sense that, okay, yeah, what we call intelligence is lacking a lot to a decent degree in that individual versus what we would call average. We kind of have a sense of what intelligence is, but this is actually pointing at something statistically and saying whatever drives those correlations, whatever drives people to get the test results really well in that group of people or really poor or on average, that single thing that you point to, we could call that intelligence. And here's how they actually catch it. So imagine you have a scatter plot. We'll just do 2 dimensions, like the usual X, Y axes, right? And you put the dots on the graph. Every dot is an individual. And then you can draw a line through the middle of those dots, and then you catch the trend. This is obviously a normal thing to do, science, right, when you use statistics. And you draw the line through everyone's scores, and then okay, fine. But then you name that line intelligence. You call it G. They call it the G factor. Because this would normally not be in only 2 dimensions. This would be a dimension for every section that you had on the IQ test. So if it was a dozen, this would be like a 12-dimensional plot. You can't visualize it in your mind, obviously. We can only visualize 3 dimensions. So, but mathematically, you could define that, called factor analysis in this case. So it's this 12-dimensional plot, but it's the same idea as the 2-dimensional in terms of concept. A dot is an individual, and they sit somewhere in that space. And where they sit depends on what they scored across all those different sections. Well, you can imagine that that's not going to be like just a circle of random dots. If it was, the whole thing would be random. What you end up getting is almost this kind of like cigar shape, this trend, right? The poor performers would be in that bottom left. The high performers would be in the bottom right. Average somewhere in the middle. It gets elongated. So there's something non-random happening there. Well, the people in the IQ study space, the proponents of IQ, the researchers, that's what they call the G factor. Okay. Now, statistically, that's fine. You can do whatever you want. You can give people tests. You can put the dots on the chart. You can look for a trend like we usually do in science. Where it gets different, though, with IQ is they don't just say, okay, that's an interesting trend, that's an interesting correlation. They point at it and say that's something phenomenologically real. Like that is something in biology. That is actually intelligence itself. That line. They reify it. You take something abstract, which kind of looks, in this case, like maybe a summary. It's actually not even a summary. We'll get into that. But let's just say you think of that trend line. It's kind of like it's summarizing something. And then you reify that. You call that summary. That's actually what intelligence is. Okay, that's what the IQ proponents do. Okay, but what happens if you go down a floor? Meaning, if you look at the trend line, it's kind of like a summary. Okay, well, what are you summarizing? Well, it's dots. Well, what are the dots? Well, those dots are test scores. And the test score kind of stands in for some cognitive act that we never actually see, right? You never get to the thing that you're supposedly measuring. You only get to this kind of proxy. So the line points at kind of stand-ins, right? That point at nothing you can actually hold, nothing you can see. So it's not a summary of something real underneath. At least you can't say that it is. It's a summary of kind of more like a shadow, maybe, right? There's no floor to land on. Now, at this point, if you're in favor of IQ, everything I'm saying up at this point, you might be kind of rolling your eyes like, come on. Like, isn't that what science does anyways? Like, we always have to use proxies. And you're kind of getting into semantics here. Is it a summary? Is it not a summary? So we haven't got to the fatal flaw here yet. I'm just kind of raising the tension here so that you realize there's already something a little bit off. But let's keep going. Okay, let's keep going. Another big problem here is the number doesn't sit still. So you're pointing at something called the G factor that you call intelligence, and you're saying this is supposedly a fixed property, a fixed biological property of the human brain, let's say. Well, fixed properties they do sit still. They don't wag all over the place. They don't increase over time. If you sit the same person down twice, and you'll find that the IQ score will actually climb, usually about, let's say, 5 points, just from familiarity with the testing alone. So already there's something off here. It's not like this fundamental thing, right? It can increase in the same person just by taking the test again. And you can find meta-analyses that show that this is actually the case, right? 7 or 8 by the third sitting. You can go up 7 or 8 points if you take the IQ test 3 times. Okay, another one is across generations, it tends to drift too, right? 2 or 3 points a decade over the last century, let's say 20 plus in total. That's called the Flynn Effect. Okay, I'll put a link to some papers in here, big meta-analyses that establish this, and it just keeps rising. And lately, you'll actually be shown to maybe fall in some countries. It'll rise on average in others. Okay. It's not sitting still. So whatever moves this number moves in a single generation. A fixed thing inside you doesn't wander like that. Okay. So we've got something kind of off about the no floor. What are you even pointing at? We've got the fact that this thing moves. You're saying you're pointing at something that is kind of fundamentally true, biologically true, let's say about an individual. This is your IQ, and yet this thing keeps moving. You've got different papers here. I won't go into them. Right, you got the Sharfin 2018 paper, retest effects in cognitive ability tests. It's a big meta-analysis in intelligence, right, paper that came out, 174 samples. Anyways, they take a look at the fact that, the individual can keep getting higher and higher scores. There's the Trahan-Stubing paper, the Fletcher paper, 2014, looking at the Flynn effect. That was a big meta-analysis. That was in the Psychological Bulletin. There's the Bradsford-Rodeberg test, 2018, looked at the Flynn effect as well, and its reversal and how they can be environmentally caused and stuff like that. The take-home message here, though, is that this thing, again, is not fixed, right? Now, okay. So what's going on here? Because maybe you still want to kind of explain some of that away, and you still think, okay, there's like variation there or something. And doesn't that happen in science too, right? Like even though we think a thing is fixed, maybe there's like error in the measurement and all this kind of stuff. Well, here's the wrongness. The wrongness that's going on here has a shape, and it actually occurs in 3 different loops. And this is the core. This is my main argument here, the problem, the true pseudoscience that's happening. Okay, and it has to do with the fact that IQ never steps outside itself, as you are supposed to with any genuine science. Let me explain that. Okay, so you've got 3 loops here, which is the circularity. You're not supposed to be circular in science or logic. Okay, so you've got the sealed loop, where the number only points back to itself. So test taking tests for test taking. Okay, it's kind of like I'm going to go measure a thing, but the thing I'm measuring is the same thing that I'm using to do the measuring with. Like, it sounds dumb, right? It's circular. That's what IQ is. IQ is trying to define intelligence with test taking, and the way that they're going to measure that is through test taking. So if you do well on an IQ test, it means you're really good at test taking. The whole thing is very circular, and it doesn't get outside itself. Okay, and I'll show you examples from real science where that is not the case. Anything that's real science doesn't do that. You can't be circular like that. You can't go measure a thing using the thing you're measuring. Right? Right? The thing you're measuring can't be the tool that you're using to do the measuring. And that's what IQ very much is. It's like, how well does a person do well on tests? Let's give them a test to see how well they do on a test. It's just circular. It doesn't get outside itself. Okay, let's call that the sealed loop. The second one is the mirror. Okay, because the first one, the problem is you're not reaching out into the real world. You're just defining the thing within itself, right? It's got that circularity. Okay, so, and then someone says, and you might be thinking this, well, wait a second. No, we can reach outside the world. What we can do is we can, well, we'll take a look at the fact that how predictive IQ tests are. They are predictive of a lot of different types of life success. How much money you're going to make, maybe what school you're going to go to. A lot of the kind of current definitions of success fit into IQ very well. And that's true. It is very predictive of that. Okay, I agree. So you can say, well, there you go. Well, the problem is it's only predicting into a world that was built to match it. Meaning, you are going to do really well in life by current definitions of success, let's say money making. Well, how will you make more money? You'll do it if you've got a really good high-paying job. How do you get the really high-paying job? If you went to a really good school, how do you get into a really good school? If you do really well on exams, or if you have really high marks, how do you get really high marks? You do really well in test taking. Okay, so obviously IQ is going to be predictive of quote unquote success, not in any interesting, varied way. Like you have all different types of people have different backgrounds. You have dropouts who are successful, right? Men, women, different cultures. You have all this interesting variation when it comes to success. But if you think it's not doing any kind of prediction there, it's just saying that, look at money making and look at the way, if you look at the way society is set up, it's going to reward people who do well in test taking. It's, again, circular. It's only reflecting itself. It's not stepping outside itself. This is the problem. That's not scientific, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's too obvious. It's too trivial to even be interesting from a scientific standpoint. Of course, society has been set up to reward good test takers. Right back to academia, right? That's where it goes. Better test taking, better marks, better school, better job, better salary. That's not interesting. It's right in the design itself. You're not measuring anything. That's not even prediction. If you're predicting in a world that was built to reward the test itself, your model, your so-called science, is not actually doing a prediction. That's not prediction. Okay, it's only predicting into a world that was already built to match it. So we've got the sealed loop. Good test takers just do good on tests. You've got the mirror where it's just, it doesn't really reach out into the actual world. It just reaches out into the thing that it was already designed for. Then you have the timestamp problem that even the match is frozen to one passing decade. Okay, meaning the IQ, what we call skilled or intelligent today, is not necessarily what we're going to call it tomorrow, not what we called it yesterday. Right? So when the Enlightenment came along, this very much changed what we thought of skill and what we called skilled or what we called intelligent. Right? Back in the day, our ancestors, maybe it was your ability to navigate your way through a forest. Maybe it was your ability, I don't know, to negotiate terms with people, right? I mean, there's all kinds of something to do with a tribe or something to do with hierarchy, right? As things change, as technology comes, as innovation happens, we change the definition of what smart and intelligent or what skilled is. Think about artificial intelligence right now. It's very much going to change. It is changing what it means to be good at something, right? AI is now doing mathematical proofs. AI is able to do levels of scientific research. AI has levels of genuine creativity to it. What does it mean to be, whatever we were using in the Enlightenment to define smart, to define skilled, is absolutely going through a drastic change. And in the next 10 years, AI is going to dramatically change that. Of course it is. Because so much of the stuff that we thought couldn't be automated is being automated. The white collar stuff is now being automated. So now go back to the startup with this particular timestamp problem. The startup is all based around a time-stamped notion of what intelligence is, because IQ is time-stamped like that. IQ is about test taking. Test taking is about a very specific, narrow version of what we call smart. It's very post-enlightenment or enlightenment, low-level puzzle solving, analytical, right, type of intelligence. Now you could say that is a type of smart. Sure, I agree, that is a type of smart. But it's hardly the only one. And for most of human history, it wasn't the definition. And there's actually little reason to believe it's going to be the definition going forward because of the new type of automation that we now have, artificial intelligence. Okay, so what the startup is doing is taking a definition of smart that has only been around in very recent history, test taking, analytical, low-level stuff, and now it's going to filter society based on what is going to reasonably be outdated by the time those children grow up. They could actually be doing the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. Like presumably, if you go through this program, nucleus genomics, and you get filtered, you were the embryo, and then 20 years later, you're well, whatever. Let's say you're just entering the workforce or something like that, getting into university, you're thinking about your future, you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life. If there was anything to what they were doing, which there probably isn't anyway, but if there was, like if you were a certain type of person now, you would actually be ill-fitted to society. You wouldn't be necessarily the smart or intelligent. You wouldn't be particularly skilled because you'd have all the low-level type of knowledge, the low-level test-taking skills that have been automated through things like artificial intelligence, right? That's assuming it's going to be doing any actual real filtering to begin with. I mean, they're doing real selection, but that doesn't mean the person who grows up is going to be that different, right? But even if it were, it would be going in the opposite direction of what they're proclaiming, right? So it wants to filter children, but locking them into a potentially an outdated decade. Kind of ironic, right? So you've got the three types of mirrors, kind of self-reflection, non-scientific things happening. That's circularity. I mean, this happens in logic, right? Like if I make an argument and I say, well, the Bible is true. Why? Well, because it's in the Bible. I think you would agree that's a pretty stupid thing to say. The Bible isn't necessarily stupid, but that argument was stupid, right? Same thing in science. Like if you say, something about a scientific phenomenon, and then you point back to the phenomenon itself, or you point back to the model itself and say that's why, it's circular. That's not smart in any decade, right? That's not an intelligent way to make an argument. It's circular. It's a fallacy. Okay, that fallacy extends into science. If you go to measure a thing, and the thing you're measuring is the same thing that you're using to measure, and the thing you're using to measure is the same thing that you're measuring, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. You got to step outside the circle. And IQ doesn't, right? So those three loops there of circularity, they aren't really three individual problems. They're actually one problem just done three times. Every loop is missing the same thing. It's missing a way to check the number against something outside itself. Doesn't escape the circle. Okay, the sealed loop never leaves the page. The mirror only ever finds its own reflection. The timestamp is pinned to the moment that's already sliding away. Like perfect example today with AI. There's no exits. There's no outside. And that's why the line through the dots was never even a summary. I alluded to this. Like, is that even a summary? It seems to make sense. I'm looking at a trend line. It summarizes something real, right? It's not even a summary. A book summary is a summary, right? Right, because there's a book underneath. If I read The Fall of Rome or something, or Napoleon, whatever, and they say, you've never read it, and I give you a summary, you could say, well, that summary, assuming I gave you a good one, it still gives me a pretty good idea of a real thing, because there is a real thing directly underneath it. The thing directly underneath it is a book. That's not like IQ, right? What's the thing underneath it? right? I can give you the book and you can go read it and you can confirm that my summary actually had something to it, right? This line summarizes a pattern of a trend. The line in IQ, it shows you a pattern, right, of a trend of scores that only ever stood in for something that we can't actually see. It's not the same thing. It's not even a summary of anything. If you chase it to the bottom for the real thing, there's no quote unquote book down there. It's not there. Right? It's just dots again. With IQ, the ruler and the thing being measured are defined by each other. I want to say that again. This is the most critical, right, critique I have of IQ. Right? Is that the ruler and the thing being measured are defined by each other with no third point outside the pair. Okay, so let's do examples. Because at this point, hopefully you're realizing there is indeed something pseudoscientific happening here. It's not real science. Take temperature. Mercury thermometer, right? Okay, so you can say, well, that's a proxy. Like it's not, the thermometer is not temperature itself. So what's the difference? I'm measuring temperature, correct. But temperature is anchored far outside the tube that you're using to measure on a thermometer. It shows up independently in the pressure of a gas. The spectrum of light of hot objects that hot objects emit. The electrical voltage across a thermocouple, right? The speed of sound through air. There's four right there. There's four unrelated physical systems. There's no mercury involved, but they all yield the same temperature scale. You step outside. It's an independent thing. They all converge. We talked about lack of convergence. They all converge to the same thing independently. Think about just atomic molecular reality. You got Brownian motion. You got X-ray crystallography. You have electrochemistry. Perrin famously listed about 13 independent methods that all landed on the same count of molecules. 13 roads, one number. Take cystic fibrosis, okay, because here's kind of like the correlation type stuff. Okay, so the gene for cystic fibrosis. The mechanism was established on an independent track. The gene codes for a protein. The protein is a chloride channel. It interferes and you can put that channel in the cell membrane. In addition, you can watch the chloride fail to cross. The point is, you've got all this correlation for cystic fibrosis, but they don't point to the correlation and say that's the evidence. That's not the evidence, right? The evidence is an actual, real physical mechanism that has been established, in a petri dish or whatever it is they're doing, right? It's not a correlation with the disease. It's a separate physical demonstration of what the molecule does. It's arrived at without reference to the patient data. You can use the patient data. You can do the patient data first. The correlation might be why you're interested in the thing, but you can't just point to a correlation and say that's. We all know correlation does not imply causation, right? The reason why you can still try to get something causal out of it is because you have these independent things that verify what you see in the correlated data. You do not have that in IQ. You have nothing else. There's nothing else. So which turns the whole question inside out. It was never like, how much of this do you have, right? Like IQ, like, is that the question? How much IQ do you have? Like, no, that question is ill-posed right from the onset. It's not that. It's why did we believe there was a thing to have when nothing ever validated it from the outside? That's the real question, okay? So, look, here's the fundamental thing. Okay, the law underneath all three loops. A claim about reality only earns the word real when something outside the claim can confirm it. Okay, that's the biggest thing I want you to understand in this episode. And that's not a rule about IQ. That's not specific to IQ. That's the rule that separates science from storytelling. Full stop. Okay, and you can watch it work in real science. Again, you go back to that cystic fibrosis example, right? A gene correlates with the disease. Okay, correct. But the correlation is not the evidence. The evidence is a mechanism that stands on its own, right? The gene makes a broken protein. The protein is a channel that fails to let chloride cross, and you can watch it fail in a dish. No patience, no correlation. It's just a molecule doing the broken thing. Like, you got to have a real thing to point at. You can't just look at correlation itself. Checkable, this example is checkable by a route that never runs back through the correlation, right? That's the outside doing its job. That's what you have to have in real science. Now go to IQ. Okay, so where is the outside with IQ? Why do the tests correlate? So let's say I ask you, why do the tests correlate? And you could say, because there's G. Okay, well, how do you know there's a G? Because the tests correlate. That's all IQ research right there. That's what it all goes back to. The circularity. Doesn't matter if you're looking predicting outcomes. Doesn't matter if you're looking at this. Boom, boom, boom. It never gets outside itself. Why do those tests? There's nothing wrong with correlation. That is interesting. The IQ test correlation is kind of interesting. It's neat, but you can't. It's not science if you stop there, right? Why did the test correlate? Because there's G. How do we know there's G? Because the tests correlate. You will always find that circularity in every single aspect of IQ research. They won't tell you that, of course, but that's where it is. I don't even think most researchers realize it is circular because they sit on top of layers of abstraction and then they just do correlation and they think they're doing science, right? It's not like science, right? The witness for the claim is the claim itself. That's irrational. That's illogical. There's no independent chain. There's no mechanism found beforehand. There's nothing standing outside to vouch. Go back to that startup again. The thing they correlated the DNA against was the test score, not intelligence, the score. So if you walk that chain out loud, you've got DNA variants correlate with test scores, which are a mere reflection of a culture's rewarded dialect, which was reified as intelligence, right? And that's the other aspect of the circularity here, right? When you do well on a test, what are you testing? You can't get outside. You can't get away from the fact that there's this cultural aspect to what's being tested. The words that are being used, the examples that are being given. I talked about this on a previous episode, right? Where maybe they show a weather vane. We all know what a weather vane is, but maybe you come from a culture that doesn't even know it. So now you're going to be limited in your ability to answer the question simply because you didn't know what the heck the symbol was. You can't get away from that in IQ. There's no way to make it completely objective. It always has a cultural imprint to it, right? Which is probably why, according to the Flynn Effect, you've got some cultures where the IQ keeps rising, and then you've got ones where maybe it goes lower. There's going to be cultural mismatch there. The genetics didn't reach past the test to touch some real thing underneath with IQ. It couldn't, and with this startup, right? There was nothing under the test to reach. It just found the DNA shadows of the test's shadows of shadows of shadows. Every circularity you already named, right, that you understand, right, that sealed loop, the mirror problem, the time stamping, right, it's still sitting there with this startup. You can get away from it. Fully intact, and now with a genome wrapped around it, right? It doesn't make it more scientific. Okay, so now let's say you still want to push back on this a bit after everything I said, which is in some sense surprising because it's just reached such levels of illogic that it's kind of, right? But let's say you know, hold on, maybe there is something outside. Hold on. As the last move, I'm going to borrow something from outside here. Let's say G tracks reaction time and brain size. Oh, okay. Reaction time and brain size. Things that don't have a culture in them. So I was just talking about the culture mismatch. What about reaction time? Reaction time might be like the ability to, I don't know, react to flashing lights or something, and then brain size. Those correlations are real. They're pretty modest. Okay. And sometimes correlation is not even correlation, as Nassim Taleb likes to say. Let's not get into all that. Let's just say, okay, yes, there's correlations there. They're modest, but they're there. I will grant that. But every real thing has correlates, right? And so does every fake one. Like shoe size correlates with reading ability in children. Why? Well, because they both just grow with age. Like not interesting, not surprising, still correlated, right? Correlates, things that are correlated, are cheap. It's cheap, right? That was never the test. The test is whether the thing they're pointing at can be pinned down on its own, right? So, you can try to define like neural efficiency or something. Neural efficiency has no definition to begin with that you can really pin down. If you ask what it is, the only answer is going to be the general thing that makes people good at cognitive tasks, which is the definition of G. So now you're back to G again, right? Compare a chloride channel, you can say exactly what it is without ever mentioning a cystic fibrosis. A real anchor, right, is something that's written in a different language than the thing it anchors, right? Neural efficiency can't be. It's G wearing a lab coat. You still don't get out of the circularity. Right? Reaction time, brain size, correlated with what? G. What's G? Neural efficiency. What's neural efficiency? G. It's not science, people. It's just not how it works. Obviously. It's not even how logic, don't even get to science. It's not even how basic critical thinking works. But you can't escape the circle. And that's the whole disease here, right, of the problem with IQ, the reason why it's a pseudoscience. And it's really just one disease, a number with no outside. IQ is a number with no outside. Every loop, right, is that same emptiness seen from a different angle. It's reification, right? Reification isn't 3 errors. It's 1. It's mistaking the inside of your math with the outside world. Okay. So let's take I'll take the fairest version of this. I'm not going to say, well, IQ is fake and then just walk away. I'll just give any IQ proponent out there a challenge. Show one independent thing that validates the number without presupposing the number. That whole thing, right? Show me just one independent thing that validates the number without presupposing the number. You can't out-argue a circle. You have to step outside the circle. All real science does that. So just give me one. If you want to consider IQ a science, there's your challenge. Prove me wrong. Just give me one. That challenge is brutal because there isn't one. You can't pick one. You're not going to find one, right? Everything you do is going to curve back before the argument even lands. You can't out-argue a circle. The only thing you can do, you're supposed to do in science, is step outside it. And just basic critical thinking. You can't be circular. Everything in the Bible is true. Why? Because it was written in the Bible. Nobody would take that statement seriously. Right? Stepping outside it is exactly what this seductive number of IQ cannot do. Right? Now, this is the move that physics already made, right? The wave particle didn't end with a winner. It ended when everyone saw the question was actually malformed. This is what I said at the beginning, right? How much of this one thing do you have has no answer because there was never one thing. Was it the wave? Was it the particle? Wrong question. It was a wave particle, right? The question was wrong to begin with. So the 100 years of lack of convergence isn't just science being what science is, right? It's a deeper structural logical flaw in the very thesis of the notion of IQ. So what survives IQ is pretty, what is honest and small. We could say it's a rough proxy for fit to one game in one era. Because you could just say, you know what, I don't care about any of this. IQ still predicts, even though it's circular, it still predicts success because it's about test taking and our world is set up for test taking. And if you do well in test taking, you can do well in the world. Yeah, that's true. I don't think you need the notion of IQ for that, though. Just go do well on tests. You don't need a number, right? Again, there's nothing scientific about that. You're not pointing to any phenomenon. You're not doing any science whatsoever. So I don't know what the number is giving you. But is a rough proxy for fit to one very myopic game. Yes, that's true. In one era of time, which is going to be very different tomorrow. It's worthless as a verdict on a person, though. And that's the exact use everybody wants. They want it, go back to that Thanksgiving dinner table, they want it as a verdict on a person. It can't be. It doesn't work like that. Put the number down, the dinner table question, am I one of the smart ones? That was never about measuring you. It measured your fit to one game, one decade, through a mirror we built and fell for. It's not the test. That's just a reflex. Okay? So, I talk about IQ quite a bit, actually. I've done some writing about it. It bothers me as someone who I would consider understands science. I think it bothers a lot of real scientists. I think it bothers a lot of people, even laymen, and maybe they don't really know why. Maybe I've helped give you the reason why that is. Maybe you were intuitively picking up on the circularity of it, or on the cultural aspect of it, right? Or maybe the time-stamped area, the version of intelligence of it. But so when it goes beyond just kind of a little quirky thing that some researchers are doing, even though it's pseudoscientific, when it goes beyond that, you actually get startups who are going to use it to filter embryos and try to select people, which are probably going to be super ill-suited, if it even worked, which probably wouldn't, but if it did, they'd be super ill-suited to the time because the notion of skill and intelligence is changing. It's not just moral. It's not just morally wrong. It's not just ethically wrong. It's actually kind of stupid. It's genuinely dumb. It's genuinely bad science, I would argue. All right, that's it for this episode. Thanks everyone for listening, and for those of you who are watching, and go ahead and check out Dekion.io if you want to know more about this stuff. Join the community. Let me know what you think. This one might have fired you up. Maybe you got some examples. You think you can step outside that circle? Okay, let me know. Maybe you can meet my challenge. Let me know. Jump on board and dig in deep and look at visuals for all the different things. You can talk to AI about the episodes and make connections and all that fun stuff. That's where the community is. That's where we're talking. That's where we're learning a lot more about this stuff. So go ahead and check out Dekion.io. That's DEKYON.io. Okay, everyone. Thanks again. Until next time. Take care.